The sun was setting over the wide Wyoming plains, and the sky burned with orange fire, the kind that made the land look endless and lonely. A single train moved across the tracks like a steel snake, its whistle echoing through the quiet. But, hidden in the shadows, a group of riders watched, waiting. They sat still on their horses, faces covered, eyes locked on the growing engine light. These men were known by many names. Renegades, fugitives, but history would call them something else. The Wild Bunch, the last true outlaws of the American West. But before the gunfire, before the explosions, before the headlines that shook the nation, there were ordinary boys who lived through hard times, broken systems, and a land that demanded strength. Their story began long before they rode into legend. The boy who hated chains, Butch Cassidy, his real name was Robert Leroy Parker, but no one would remember that. He grew up in Utah, the oldest son of a poor Mormon family trying to survive on rough soil and honest work. As a teenager, he learned early that the world was not fair. Ranch owners cheated workers. Cattle barons took land from small families. The system was built for the rich, and everyone else fought for scraps. Butch was different from most boys. He had a soft voice, a quick smile, and a strong sense of justice. But he also carried a spark inside him, a spark that hated rules made by men who already had more than enough. One day, after watching his family struggle again, Butch walked into a store asking for supplies. He didn't have money. The owner mocked him, laughed at his patched clothes, and threw him out. That moment stayed with him. It planted a feeling deep in his chest, a feeling that the world was not built for men like him. Later, he met an old cowboy named Mike Cassidy, a man with a wild heart and a dangerous reputation. Cassidy taught him how to ride fast, shoot straight, and survive when the world turned its back on you. When Robert Parker finally left home, he carried a new name, Butch Cassidy, a name the West would never forget. The kid who learned to fight. The world, Sundance, far away in Pennsylvania. Another boy was learning the same lesson. His name was Harry Lungabaugh, later known as the Sundance Kid. He left home young, riding west in search of freedom. Instead, he found a land ruled by powerful cattle companies and lawmen who decided guilt before hearing truth. Harry was arrested for stealing a horse he swore wasn't his. The judge didn't care. The sheriff didn't listen. The sentence, hard. Time, he walked into prison as a boy and walked out as something else, a man who understood that the world only respected the gun on your hip and the courage in your heart. He promised himself he would never again let another man decide his fate. People would later call him deadly, dangerous, a man with eyes like cold steel. But those who truly knew him said he wasn't cruel, just fast, sharp, and determined never to kneel to anyone again. A broken West creates its outlaws by the late 1800s. The West was changing fast. The land was no longer free and open, barbed. Wires stretched across fields. Trains cut through the mountains like veins of money and power. Big ranchers controlled everything from cattle to courtrooms. For young cowboys like Butch and Harry, survival was a daily fight. They drifted from ranch to ranch, working long hours for pennies. They saw good men crushed by unfair taxes, greedy owners, and corrupt sheriffs. The West didn't give out justice. Men like them had to take it where roads of outlaws meet no one. Knows the exact day Butch Cassidy met the Sundance Kid? Some say it was a campfire on the trail. Others say it was a poker game in Wyoming. What matters is this. Two broken men looked at each other and saw the same story. Both had tried to live on as both had been punished for it. Both were tired of living under someone else's boots. There, in that moment, a silent bond formed. Not of crime, but of survival, of choosing their own fate in a world that offered none. Together, they drifted into the company of riders like them. Will Carver, the quiet, loyal one, Ben Kilpatrick, strong as an ox news, Carver, clever and unpredictable. Elsie lay, Butch's best friend. Steady and smart kid Curry. Dangerous, emotional, ready to explode. They were misfits. Broken pieces, men with scars on the inside and outside. They didn't set out to become legends. They simply wanted freedom, and the world wouldn't give it. A storm gathering at Holintawaldi Bin, Wyoming, stood a natural fortress. Holintawal, a hideout carved by wind, rock, and time. No lawman dared enter. No sheriff could find. It became the home of drifters, cowboys, fugitives, and soon the group history would call the Wild Bunch. At night, their campfire flames flickered against the canyon walls. Butch talked softly about fairness. Sundance cleaned his guns in silence. The others listened, laughed, argued, planned. None of them knew it yet, but they were standing at the edge of an era. The West was dying. Their kind was disappearing. And soon, the whole world would know their names. This was the calm before the storm. Their first ride into history was coming, and the train in the distance was almost here. Morning light crept across the Wyoming hills, touching the dusty boots, torn coats, and tired faces of the men gathered at Hole in the Wall. Smoke curled from their campfire. Coffee boiled in a black pot. Horses snorted softly. In the cold air, it all looked peaceful, like a normal cowboy camp. But peace was something these men had never fully known. They were drifting souls shaped by the same cruel truth. In the West, justice favored the rich. Everyone else had to fight for it. This was the world that pushed ordinary cowboys toward outlaw. Life is shaped what would soon be known as the Wild Bunch, the hard road of honest work before the robberies. Before the wanted posters, these men tried to live clean. They worked ranches, herded cattle, rode endless miles under burning suns and freezing storms. They mended fences, broke wild horses, and slept under the stars. The pay was terrible. The work was dangerous, and the bosses, cruel, powerful, untouchable. Big cattle companies ruled entire counties. If a cowboy complained about wages, he was fired. If he asked for justice, he was beaten or thrown in jail on false charges. If he pushed too hard, he was simply found dead by accident. Butch Cassidy saw this firsthand. Sundance too. So did Will Carver, Ben Kilpatrick, and every other man who would ride with the Wild Bunch. They learned early that honest men starved, while the powerful grew stronger. Whenever one of them talked about it around the fire, Butch would say the same thing. This land ain't made equal, so we make our own way. Butch tries the straight path, and the world says no even. With all the hardship, Butch Cassidy still tried to stay on the right side of the law. He saved what little money he earned and dreamed of owning a small ranch. A quiet life, no guns, no trouble. He finally bought a piece of land in Wyoming, hoping to build something real. But that dream lasted only months. A cattle baron wanted the same land. A sheriff took the baron's side. And Butch lost everything. When he confronted the powerful men, they laughed in his face. They said a small cowboy had no right to own land in their territory. They ran him off with threats and rifles. That night, Butch sat alone under the cold stars, staring at his calloused hands. Everything he had tried to build the life he wanted was gone. Not because he failed, but because the system was never made for him. That was the moment he knew. A man could follow every rule and still lose everything. A man could live clean and still starve. A man could trust the land, be betrayed by it. The spark inside him grew stronger. The outlaw path began to take shape. Sundance learns the cost of trust. Sundance's story was different, but the lesson was the same. After leaving Pennsylvania, he traveled across the West working on ranches and freight lines. He was quiet, respectful, and fast with his hands. But trouble followed him not because he started it, but because people feared young cowboys with no family name. One day, he borrowed a horse to chase down runaway cattle. The owner accused him of stealing. No trial, no chance to defend himself. Just the word of a rich rancher against a poor cowboy. Sundance was thrown in a dark, cold jail cell. No sunlight, no visitors, no voice. He spent over a year locked away for a crime he didn't commit. He entered prison innocent. He left as a man who would trust no system again. In those long, silent hours, he made a decision. If the world treats me like an outlaw, then I'll be one on my own terms. The others who would join every future member of the Wild Bunch carried his own scars. Will Carver, a steady one, watched the sheriff frame his brother. Ben Kilpatrick lost work after a powerful rancher accused him of cheating at carts a lie. News Carver lived through a range war where innocent men were hunted like animals. LZ Lay, Butch's closest friend, felt the weight of poverty crush every honest dream. And then there was Kid Curry Harvey Logan. He didn't become an outlaw. He was forced into it. A railroad guard beat his brother half to death for no reason and walked away with a smile. Curry never forgot that. The rage inside him never cooled. Some men break, some men bend. These men hardened. The moment the roads converge, some stories begin in a single moment. Some begin slowly, like cracks forming in stone. For Butch, Sundance, LZ Curry, Carver, and Kilpatrick. Their stories ran separately at first, like lonely trails through the mountains, but fate, hardship, and injustice slowly pushed those roads toward one another, at saloons, on cattle drives, at camps, on cold nights, in the outlaw towns where survival depended on who you rode with. When these men finally crossed paths, something clicked. They recognized the same hunger, the same anger, the same desire to decide their own future. They didn't come together out of greed. They came together because the world offered them no other path. They weren't born outlaws. The West made them. Outlaws that the first sparks of the Wild Bunch at Hole in the Wall. As the fire crackled and wind whispered through the canyon walls, these men began to talk not about crime, but about revenge against a system that pushed them too far. Plans formed. Slowly, bonds grew stronger. A brotherhood was born in silence. They didn't know the world would remember their names. They didn't know their photos would hang in sheriff's offices across the nation. They didn't know they were becoming the final storm of a dying era. All they knew was this: the West had turned its back on them. Now they would ride against it. Their first criminal plan was forming, and the legend of the Wild Bunch was about to begin. Night settled deep over the red canyons of Wyoming. Stars shone like cold silver above the rocky cliffs, and the wind carried the smell of pine and dust. In a narrow valley protected by tall stone walls, a campfire burned quietly. Horses grazed in the shadows. Men sat close to the flames, sharpening knives, cleaning guns, boiling coffee. Men who had been pushed to the edge of the world. This hidden place was called Hole in the Wall, a natural fortress, a safe haven for anyone the law wanted gone. Here, broken men found shelter. Here, desperate men found allies. And here, a small group of tired cowboys, Butch Cassidy, Sundance Kid, LZ Lay, Kid Curry, Will Carver, Ben Kilpatrick, and others would become something greater than they ever imagined. The Wild Bunch wasn't formed in one dramatic moment. It grew, piece by piece, like sparks becoming a wildfire. Where legends first met, Butch Cassidy stood near the fire, hands in his pockets, face warm from the heat. He watched the men around him, drifters, ranch hands, ex-miners, fugitives from small counties that barely existed on maps. The West was changing, squeezing out men who once had freedom, and Butch could feel it. Every day, the world grew smaller. Sundance Kid sat slightly away from the fire, polishing his revolver in the dark. His eyes scanned the canyon entrance as if he expected trouble at any moment. He wasn't talkative, but when he spoke, men listened. LZ lay leaned beside Butch, whispering plans, possibilities, future moves. He was calm, intelligent, the kind of man who thought 3 steps ahead, perfect balance to Butch's charm and Sundance's precision. Kid Curry paced like a restless wolf. Rage lived under his skin. Every lawman who had wronged him, every beating, every injustice, he carried them all like sparks waiting for fire. One by one, the men gathered around the fire, drawn not by money, but by something deeper, a shared anger, and a shared dream of escaping a system that treated them as disposable. Butch looked at them, every scarred face glowing in the firelight, and said quietly, "We can drift alone, or we can stand together. Riding as one, we can beat the world that tried to beat us." Those words didn't form the gang, but they opened the door. The rules of Butch Cassidy, and like most outlaws, Butch was not reckless. He wanted order, loyalty, and purpose. So, around that fire, he spoke the first rules, simple but powerful. No killing unless forced. Butch did not want blood. He wanted money, freedom, respect, no betrayal. It's a man who rode with them trusted. Them with his life. Share the loot fairly. Every member, big or small, got a piece. Ride hard, hide smart. The gang moved like ghosts, fast and invisible. These rules separated the wild bunch from every gang before them. They weren't drunken killers or greedy bandits. They were organized, disciplined, strategic, and every man in that canyon agreed. Even Kid Curry, though blood simmered in his eyes, nodded his head. A brotherhood born in hardship the next days at Hole in the Wall shaped the future. Men trained together, rode together, laughed, argued, bonded. They hunted deer in the morning, fixed saddles in the afternoon, and told stories at night. Sundance practiced draw speed until his hands blistered. Kid Curry fired at tree stumps until chips flew like rain. Will Carver built a lookout spot high above the canyon. Ben Kilpatrick sharpened his lasso skills, able to rope anything within reach. These weren't criminals by nature. They were cowboys who had become fighters because life gave them no choice at the center. Butch Cassidy stood like a quiet force, friendly enough to be trusted, strong enough to be followed. He listened to every man, gave advice, kept peace. When tempers rose, he had a rare ability. Men wanted to follow him, and slowly. Without ceremony or celebration, they became something larger. A family. A brotherhood. A force the West had never seen before. Plans whispered in a dark one cold evening. Rain drifted over the canyon. The men gathered under a rock ledge, listening to the drops hit the stone. Butch unfolded a rough map, hand-drawn. Edges torn, routes marked in charcoal. A train route, a bank location. Escape trails no lawmen knew. The men leaned in closer. "We're not stealing from the poor," Butch said softly. "We're taking from the rich lines. The big companies who robbed cowboys for years." The idea hit every man like thunder. Justice on their own terms. LZ Lay studied the map. "We can do it clean," he said. "Fast, no killing." Sundance nodded. "If we strike hard and disappear, the law will chase shadows." Kid Curry smirked, a dangerous smile. Let them chase. The plan wasn't complete. The date wasn't chosen, but the seed was planted. Their first major job would change everything. Name carved in stone weeks past. More riders joined. More supplies came in. Word spread quietly through saloons and ranch towns. A new group was formed and organized. Fearless, loyal, men began whispering a name. It didn't come from the gang themselves. It came from the world watching them grow. The Wild Bunch. Name spoken with fear by sheriffs, a name spoken with respect by cowboys, a name spoken with anger by wealthy cattle barons. The gang didn't care about fame, but the name stuck, and soon it would travel across every newspaper in America. The last pieces fall into place as winter crept in. The men sharpened their skills. Sundance perfected timing. Butch studied train schedules. Carver scouted escape routes. Kid Curry watched all movements. They didn't know it yet, but history was already watching them. They were standing on the edge of their first great job, one that would turn them from drifting cowboys into the most feared outlaw gang. In Western history, the fire crackled. The canyon echoed with the distant howl of wind. The world held its breath. The wild bunch had been born. Now it was ready to strike. Snow still clung to the edges of the Wyoming hills when the plan finally took shape. The days were short, the nights long, and the cold air felt sharp enough to cut skin. But in a small cabin hidden deep inside Holinthawal, warmth glowed from a lantern hanging over a rough wooden table. Around that table stood the men who were about to shake the whole nation. The Wilds bunch had chosen their first great strike. The target, the Union Pacific Overland Flyer train packed with mail, valuables, and cash from powerful companies. It wasn't just a robbery. It was a message. The plan begins. Butch Cassidy stood at the center of the room, sleeves rolled up, eyes calm. He laid out a detailed hand-drawn map. It showed train tracks, telegraph lines, hiding spots, and escape routes. The men crowded around. Sundance leaned forward with sharp, focused eyes. LZ crossed his arms, studying every detail. Will Carver tapped a pencil on the table. Ben Kilpatrick listened quietly. Kid Curry paced near the wall, restless and excited. Butch spoke softly, but his words carried strength. We do this clean. No one gets killed. No mistakes. We strike fast. We disappear faster. Sundance nodded. The right job, the right place. LZ pointed to the map. Wilcox, Bridge Narrow, remote, perfect. Kid Curry grinned. Perfect for blowing a train. Sky dash high, double quotes. Butch shot him a warning look. Not sky high, just as safe. Kid Curry smirked, but said nothing. He knew Butch's rule. Violence only when necessary. Scouting the target for weeks. The gang split into small pairs and rode across the Wyoming plains, pretending to be travelers, cowboys, or drifters. They watched the train from a distance. Sits, timing, speed, the guards who rode it, the mail car that held the safe. Sundance and Will Carver studied telegraph stations. If news of a robbery traveled too quickly, the law would arrive fast. They memorized which wires could be cut. LZ found the perfect ambush spot, a curve near the Wilcox Bridge where the train was forced to slow down. Ben Kilpatrick checked routes for fast escape. He tested streams, valleys, and ridges to see where horses could run at full speed. And Kid Curry watched lawmen. He memorized faces, sheriffs, deputies, guards. He studied how quickly they could ride and how far they would chase. The wild bunch wasn't just planning a robbery. They were preparing for war. On the night before the heist, the gang gathered around a low campfire hidden between tall rocks. The horses were fed and saddled, rifles cleaned, scarves prepared to cover their faces. The fire popped softly in the cold night. Butch sat quietly, thinking. He wasn't nervous. He never looked nervous, but he knew this job would define them. Once they crossed this line, there was no turning back. No ranch work, no honest living. Only the outlaw trail. LZ sat beside him. You all right? Butch nodded. Just thinking. We pulled this off, we'll have enough money to live free for a long time. LZ gave a small smile. Then let's make it clean. Sundance sat on a rock sharpening his knife, the blade whispering against stone. Kid Curry tossed pebbles into the fire, sparks flying upward like angry fireflies. The men were quiet, each lost in his own thoughts. Freedom, danger, revenge, purpose, all of it waited on the tracks. I had dot riders in the dark just before midnight. The gang mounted their horses. The sky was moonless, the world around them silent except for the soft thud of hooves on frozen ground. They rode in single file through narrow passes, across icy streams, and along ridges that looked down into black valleys. Their breath rose like white smoke in the cold night. No one spoke. Every man knew his role. Every man knew the stakes. When they reached the ambush point, they moved like ghosts. Sundance and Carver cut the telegraph wires. Elsie positioned the dynamite. Kid Curry and Ben Kilpatrick took places along the rocks. Butch checked the scene one more time, his eyes sharp and steady. The world felt frozen. Only the faint vibration of the earth hinted at what was coming. A distant whistle echoed through the canyon. The overland flyer was approaching. The train arrives, the train engine burst into view, steaming forward through the dark. A bright headlamp sliced across the rocks, lighting up the masked faces of the gang hidden in the shadows. Sundance raised his hand. Now Elsie lit the fuse. A spark hissed along the powder line. The dynamite exploded with a thunderous roar, ripping part of the track loose. The train screeched, sparks flying, metal groaning as it shuddered to a violent stop. Horses neighed, steam hissed. Passengers screamed inside the cars. The wild bunch rode forward. Butch shouted, "Stay calm. Do what we say, and no one gets hurt." They moved with precision, like soldiers. Like a machine, Sundance covered the guards. Carver pulled open doors. Elsie and Kid Curry headed straight for the mail car where the safe sat waiting. Inside, the terrified mail clerk backed away, hands raised. Butch's voice cut through the chaos, calm, almost gentle. "Easy now. We're only here for one thing. The safe, the heart of the entire job." Kid Curry placed the dynamite. Elsie lit the fuse. Everyone ducked. The blast shook the night, sending metal fragments flying. The safe blew open. Cash bonds, jewelry, fortune spilled out in the smoke. Butch grabbed the bags. "Mount up. Move." The wild bunch swept away into the darkness as fast as they had appeared, leaving behind a shattered train, stunned passengers, and the first spark of a legend. The West wakes up by sunrise. The story spread like wildfire. A gang of masked riders, a blown-apart safe, no deaths, a disappearing act no sheriff could explain. Newspapers printed the same headline: "The Wilcox train robbers strike, a new breed of outlaw." The wild bunch had announced themselves to the world, and they were just getting started. The morning after the Wilcox train robbery, the West didn't wake up slowly. It jolted awake like a frightened animal. Newspapers flew off, printing presses, cities buzzed, ranchers talked in disbelief, sheriffs stared at the reports with pale faces. A single question echoed everywhere: who were these men? The overland flyer robbery wasn't the first crime the West had seen, but it was the most organized, the most fearless, the cleanest job in years. No drunken bandits, no random killing, just a perfect strike and a vanish into thin air. And that was what scared the powerful companies most. Within hours, telegrams reached the one organization feared by criminals across the nation. The Pinkerton National Detective Agency, the chase for the wild bunch had officially begun. The arrival of the Pinkertons at the Salt Lake City train station. Two men in long coats stepped off a passenger car and scanned the town with sharp eyes. They looked different from most lawmen, more polished, more controlled, more dangerous. These were Pinkerton agents, men known for hunting outlaws to the ends of the earth. One was Joe LaFares, quiet and observant. The other was Charles Siringo, sharp as a knife and relentless as winter. Both had thick folders of names, sketches, and witness accounts. Both had been ordered to do one thing: find the wild bunch, break them, bring them in alive or dead. They began interviews in towns across Wyoming. They rode to ranchas, saloons, mining camps, and telegraph stations. They studied tracks, questioned passengers, and followed rumors. But everywhere they went, they heard the same thing. These outlaws. They were polite, calm, professional. That was what puzzled the Pinkertons most. This wasn't a gang of drunks or killers. This was a team, disciplined, organized, bonded. A new kind of threat. The gang fills the heat back and hole into wall. Butch Cassidy sat on a fallen log, reading a week-old newspaper. His face stayed calm, but his eyes tightened as he scanned the words. Pinkerton's promise. These outlaws will not escape. Sundance sat sharpening his knife nearby. They're coming. Butch nodded. Of course they are. LZ lay folded. His arms? They won't quit. Pinkertons don't quit. Kid Curry kicked a rock across the canyon floor, anger boiling under his skin. Then we won't quit either. Butch looked up sharply. We don't fight them, Curry. Not unless we have no choice. Curry spat at the ground. He didn't share Butch's calm. He wanted revenge for every wrong done to him, every brother, beaten or framed by lawmen. He didn't fear a fight, he welcomed it. Butch stood. Listen close, all of you. We only survive if we're smarter, faster, and quieter than they are. The Pinkertons are good, but we're better. His voice echoed across the canyon walls. The gang believed him. But deep inside, they knew this was different. This wasn't a sheriff. This wasn't a posse. This was a storm coming. Pinkertons tracked their every move in Siringo, followed footprints and broken brush across the plains. Agent LaFurs examined horse tracks with quiet precision. They listened to every rumor that drifted from town to town. A bartender in Medicine Bow claimed he'd seen masked men on tired horses. A telegraph operator swore someone cut his wires the night of the robbery. A ranch hand mentioned a group riding toward the high country. The Pinkertons gathered every clue, no matter how small. Slowly, a picture formed. A gang led by a charming outlaw with a clever mind, a deadly sharpshooter at his side, a wild gunman who killed without hesitation, a rotating cast of loyal riders. The Pinkertons wrote the names carefully. Butch Cassidy, Sundance Kid, Kid Curry, LZ Lay, Will Carver, Ben Kilpatrick, News Carver. The list grew. So did the pressure. A deadly mistake. Later, in a small-town saloon, tragedy struck. A group of lawmen approached some riders they believed to be members of the Wild Bunch. Voices rose, hands moved, guns flashed. In the chaos, Kid Curry's brother was killed, shot down by a deputy who thought he was shooting an outlaw. The news reached hole in the wall like a lightning bolt. Kid Curry's rage exploded. Butch tried to calm him. It was a mistake. You go after them, we all fall. But Curry wasn't listening. His voice was low, shaking. They took everything from me. Now I'm taking it back. That night, he rode out a long cold wind whipping across his face, jaw clenched, heart burning. Days later, shots rang across a small Wyoming valley. A posse found the bodies of several lawmen. The message was clear. The Wild Bunch was not afraid. And now, blood had been spilled. Pinkertons' go to war. The killings changed everything. The Pinkertons doubled their agents. Rewards tripled. Wanted. Posters spread across every town. The Wild Bunch were no longer clever robbers. They were dangerous outlaws. Fugitives of the highest order. Agent Siringo pinned a new map on his office wall covered with red lines leading to hideouts. Witness sightings, supply trails, and rumored camps. He muttered to LaFurs, they think they can run forever. LaFurs adjusted his hat. And will follow forever. The chase had become personal. The gang feels the walls closing. Enoch Holenthal spirits shifted. Laughter was quieter, Conversations shorter, eyes sharper. They still trusted Butch, but they knew the world had turned serious. The West was shrinking around them. The Pinkertons were closing in. Kid Curry was becoming more unpredictable. The newspapers were turning their faces into legends that lawmen wanted dead. Butch Cassidy, calm as ever, looked at his men around the campfire and said, "Listen, we were clever at Wilcox. Now we need to be smarter. The Pinkertons won't stop, but neither will we." The fire crackled. The canyon wind moans. The last outlaws of the West prepared for their next move. The storm wasn't coming anymore. It had arrived. The days after the Pinkertons intensified their hunt were heavy and restless. The wild bunch still lived inside the stone walls of Hole in the Wall, but the place no longer felt safe. The once quiet canyon now felt like a trap, a cage closing in from every direction. The fire still burned at night. The horses still grazed. But the laughter that once filled the canyon had grown thin. Every man could feel the change. Something cold was slipping into their world. The West was shrinking, and the wild bunch was running out of room. A silent pressure. Butch Cassidy sat alone on a high ridge overlooking the valley, arms around his knees, watching dust trails far out on the horizon. He wasn't looking for enemies, he was watching the future. Sundance walked up behind him. "They're getting closer." Butch nodded slowly. Too close. Sundance studied his leader's face. He'd known Butch for years, but now he saw something newer, not fear, but heavy thinking. "The men are starting to talk," Sundance said. "Some want to lay low. Some want to keep riding hard." "And Curry?" Butch asked without turning. Sundance's jaw tightened. "He wants blood," Butch sighed. He knew it. Everyone did when revenge lived in a man's heart. It didn't go away quietly, Kid. Curry spiraled Skid Curry, paced near the fire like a caged wolf. His eyes were sharp, his hands always near his guns. The death of his brother had broken something inside him. He wasn't the same man who once laughed around campfires or joked during long rides. His voice was lower now, his anger louder, his decisions quicker. Will Carver approached him carefully. "We need to think smart, Harvey." "Thinking smart didn't keep my brother alive," Curry snapped. Ben Kilpatrick stepped in. "We all lost something. Butch is trying to keep us alive." Curry gave a cold smirk. "Butch wants to run. I want to finish what was started." He walked away, leaving the others in heavy silence. They all respected him, but they feared what he was becoming. The world begins to close, and outside the hideout, lawmen spread like wildfire. Sheriffs patrolled towns. Posses rode through canyons. Pinkertons followed every rumor, every hoof print, every whisper. The wild bunch couldn't ride into towns as easily, couldn't stay at ranches, couldn't buy food without risking a bullet in the back. They were being cut off from supplies, from allies, from their old life. One night, Elsie lay returned to camp with bad news. Another rancher refused to sell U.S. food, he said. "Says we're too hot." Sundance threw a twig into the fire. "We've become poison." Butch didn't speak. He didn't have to. Everyone already knew. They were becoming prisoners of their own legend. Arguments. In the dark one evening, tension finally exploded. Rain fell in sheets. The fire crackled under a rock ledge. The men huddled close, cold and frustrated. Butch unfolded a map showing new escape routes. "We ride south for a while," he said. "Lay low, pick smaller targets, rebuild." Curry slammed his fist into a rock hide. "Run." "That's your plan." Butch stayed calm. "It's smarter than walking into a trap." Curry stood. "You're scared, Butch? Admit it." Sundance rose instantly, stepping between them. "Sit down, Curry." Curry sneered. "Why? You think you're faster? Try me." The air froze. Every man held his breath. Butch stepped forward, eyes steady. We're not fighting each other. We're fighting the world outside. Curry's voice shook with anger. The world took my brother, and all you want to do is run. Butch didn't flinch. I want to survive. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Curry turned away, breathing hard. The others knew the truth. A fracture had opened inside the gang. Once, they were united. Now, they were splitting into pieces. Death comes closer. A few weeks later, the Pinkertons made their first successful strike. News arrived on horseback, fast and grim. While Carver had been caught in Texas, a shootout, too many lawmen, no escape. The Wild Bunch gathered silently around the fire as Elsie Lay delivered the news. He didn't go easy, Elsie said slowly. He fought, and he didn't make it. No one spoke. Sundance clenched his jaw. Ben Kilpatrick looked down at the dirt. Butch stared into the flames, his eyes dark with grief. Carver wasn't just a partner. He was family, and now he was gone. Curry whispered, one by one. They're taking us. No one contradicted him. The fire crackled. The rain fell. Hope began to fade. Rumors of South America. A few days later, during a quiet morning, Elsie brought unexpected news. I heard something from a rancher in Rawlins, he said. A place far south, across the ocean. Argentina, big land. Clean start, no Pinkertons. The men looked up. Sundance raised an eyebrow. A new life, Elsie nodded. Big enough land to disappear. Big enough to start over. For the first time in weeks, Butch Cassidy smiled, small, hopeful. We could buy a ranch, Butch said softly. Live honest. A fresh start. Sundance didn't smile, but something in his eyes shifted. Maybe. But Curry stood abruptly. I'm not running across some ocean. Butch looked at him with tired eyes. We can't keep this up, Harvey. Sooner or later, Curry cut him off. I'll die on this land before I run from it. He stormed away. The men watched him leave, knowing something important. They were no longer one path, no longer one heart, no longer one brotherhood. The Wild Bunch was dividing. The end of the golden days, the canyon felt cold. The fires dimmer, the laughter gone. Butch, Sundance, Elsie, and others started planning the long road to South America. Curry planned something else entirely. Revenge gunfights and rage. Two futures had formed. Two directions. Two destinies. And the West, since in the end, held its breath. The greatest outlaw gang in American history was breaking apart. And nothing could stop what was coming next. The Wild Bunch was falling apart. The walls of the West were closing in. But in the middle of the chaos between the gunfights, the chases, and the restless nights, something unexpected entered the story. Love, quiet, surprising, unstoppable love. And it came in the form of a mysterious woman whose name would echo through outlaw history. Etta Place. The woman no one knew she appeared. In their lives like a soft wind moving through the dry plains. A school teacher's smile, sharp eyes, calm voice. Etta Place spoke little about her past, and the men quickly understood not to ask. Some claimed she was an Eastern girl who ran away from a strict family. Others whispered she had been married to a rancher who died in a range war. A few thought she was escaping trouble of her own, but no one knew the truth. All they knew was this. Etta Place carried peace inside her peace. The Wild Bunch had not felt in years. When Sundance first saw her, he froze. Not in fear, but in the way a man pauses when he finds something rare, something he thought he would never deserve. She matched his calm, his strength, his silence. And for the first time in his life, the fast gunman let himself feel something. Softer. Sundance opens a door he thought was closed. Sundance wasn't a man who spoke about emotions. He didn't trust easily. He didn't open up. His life had been shaped by betrayal and hard lessons, but Etta Place slipped into his world quietly, without forcing her way in. She understood him in a way no one else ever had. She saw the pain he carried from prison. She saw the exhaustion from running. She saw the sadness behind his steady eyes. One night, the two sat under the stars near the canyon rim. The fire was low, the night silent. Etta looked at him and said softly, "You don't have to outrun everything." Sundance stared at the horizon. "I've been outrunning things my whole life." "You don't have to outrun me," she whispered. He turned toward her slowly, as if afraid the moment might break. And for the first time, Sundance Kid deadly quiet, feared by lawmen's mild in a way only she ever saw it. From that moment on, their bond was sealed. Butch Cassidy finds connection. Butch Cassidy liked Etta from the beginning. Not romantically, his heart didn't bend that way, but as a soul who grounded the drifting men around him. She was protective of Sundance, respectful to Butch, honest with the whole gang. Butch often said, if Sundance trusts her, that says everything. He saw how she calmed the kid, how she softened Sundance, how she made the outlaw life feel, even briefly, like a real life. Sometimes, when the gang sat together, eating beans by firelight, Etta would tell stories of places they had never seen, books she read, cities far away, oceans the men couldn't. Imagine that the Wild Bunch listened quietly, almost childlike. For the first time, they weren't thinking about escape routes, telegraph wires, or lawmen. They were thinking about possibilities. Maybe life could be bigger than the chase. Maybe there was a world beyond guns and saddles. Maybe there was a way out that wasn't the grave. Etta Place planted that thought, and Butch Cassidy watered it. Argentina. A dream forms after the death of Will Carver and the pressure from the Pinkertons. Butch talked more openly about a new future. "We can't keep this up," he said. "We need a fresh start, something far from here." Sundance glanced at Etta. She looked back with hopeful eyes. Butch unfolded a map showing South America, a faraway land untouched by their troubles. "Argentina," he whispered. "Land we can buy, a ranch we can build, a life we can live." Etta leaned forward. "A place where no one knows our names." Sundance studied the map, but it was the look in Etta's eyes that convinced him. He wanted peace for her. He wanted safety, comfort, a life where she didn't have to sleep with fear beside her. And maybe, deep inside, Sundance wanted that peace for himself too. Kid Curry doesn't believe in dreams while Butch, Sundance, and Etta talked about the future. Curry drifted further into darkness. He watched them from a distance, Butch hopeful, Sundance calmer, Etta smiling, and the sight twisted something inside him. "They're dreaming," he said bitterly to Ben Kilpatrick. "Maybe we all need a dream," Ben answered gently. Curry scoffed. "Dreams don't save us. Guns do." When he looked at Etta, he felt something strange, not anger, but fear. Fear that the gang he called family was slipping away. Fear that he would be left behind. He didn't blame her. He blamed the world that took his brother, crushed his life, and turned him into the thing he hated most. As the others planned for Argentina, Curry planned for revenge, a moment of peace before the storm, before making their escape south. The gang enjoyed one final stretch of calm days. They stayed in a small cabin high in the Wyoming hills. Butch, Sundance, Etta, and a few remaining riders. Etta cooked meals for the men, laughing softly at their stories. Sundance took her riding across the open plains. Butch fixed saddles and talked about the ranch they would build. Those days felt warm. Warm in a way the West rarely allowed. One evening, Etta sat beside Sundance as the sun melted into a blood-red sky. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you think we can really escape all this?" she asked. Sundance didn't speak for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "If I'm with you, I can escape anything." Etta took his hand. For a moment, the outlaw life disappeared. For a moment, the world felt soft again. For a moment, They believed in tomorrow, but tomorrow would not wait. While the couple dreamed of a new life, while Butch imagined a peaceful ranch, while Etta carried hope like a fragile flower, the Pinkertons were closing in. The law was tightening its grip. The world outside their quiet cabin was sharpening its knives. The wild bunch had found love, peace, and purpose, but the storm was already riding toward them, and soon it would be impossible to escape. The day they left the United States, the sky over Wyoming was pale and quiet. No gunfire, no lawmen, no dust trails of posses riding behind them. Just three riders, Butch Cassidy, Sundance Kid, and Etta Place, moving slowly across the open land like ghosts slipping out of their own story. They didn't look like the most wanted outlaws in the West. They looked like tired travelers chasing a dream they hoped was waiting across the ocean. Farewell to the old life there. Last night in the West was silent. They camped in a lonely valley, the fires small, the stars bright. The wild bunch was scattered now, some dead, some hiding, some running. The brotherhood that once felt unbreakable now lived only in memories. Butch looked into the flames and whispered, "This land raised us and ruined us." Sundance nodded without speaking. Etta placed her hand gently over his dot. The next morning, they turned their horses toward a distant train station. No one recognized them. No one stopped them. It was as if the West, exhausted by years of gunfights and chase, was letting them go. Their journey took them by train, by ship, across storms and open seas. After weeks of travel, the three finally arrived in a place that felt cleaner, quieter, untouched: Argentina. A land of giant plains, simple towns, bright skies, and no Pinkertons, for the first time in years. Butch Cassidy smiled without pretending. A new beginning in Patagonia, in a wide valley near the Andes Mountains. Butch found what he'd always wanted: land. Real land. They purchased a ranch, acres of grass, hills rolling like green waves, and a small wooden house that felt more like a dream than shelter. Etta laughed more freely. Sundance relaxed. Butch walked the land with pride. They planted gardens. They bought cattle. They built fences, fixed roofs, and rode across their property with a sense of ownership they never knew in America. Neighbors greeted them warmly, calling Butch and Sundance honest ranchers and hard-working men. Etta was known as the quiet North American lady with kind eyes. For a short time, a brief, precious time, they were not outlaws. They were people. People with a future. But trouble follows even across seas. But no outlaw can fully escape his shadow. One afternoon, a rancher rode to their door with a newspaper from the north. On the front page sat the familiar faces: Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid, wanted for robbery. Murder, train, explosions. Etta felt her heart freeze. Sundance's jaw tightened. Butch quietly folded the paper. "Trouble crosses oceans too," he said softly. Though no one in Argentina recognized them, the danger was now real. If one curious official made the connection, their peaceful life would be over. They tried to lay low, working from sunrise to sunset, living quietly. But the wind carried rumors. The townsfolk whispered about strange men on horseback, seen in the region, bandits from Chile crossing the border. The law noticed. Suspicion spread. Eyes began turning toward newcomers. The world was getting smaller again. The temptation of easy money ranching brought peace, but not enough money. The land was slow to profit. Supplies were costly. Wolves killed calves. Thieves stole cattle. The pressures grew day by day. One evening, as they sat at their kitchen table, Butch said quietly, "Honest life comes slow. Danger comes fast." Sundance stared at his hands. "We can't go back to the old ways." Etta looked between them. "Then don't." Butch smiled sadly. "Sometimes a man doesn't get many choices." It started small. A little job, a small robbery, a wagon carrying payroll. Quick, quiet, clean. Enough money to fix their house, buy more cattle. They told themselves it was only once, then twice, then a third time. Each time, they felt the old world tugging them back. Each time, the thrill returned. Each time, they became the men they tried to bury. Soon, The newspapers in South America began printing new headlines. American bandits strike again. Butch folded the paper, sighing. They're talking about us. Sundance shook his head. We didn't come here to repeat our past. Etta whispered, but the past came for you. A country loses its innocence. The robberies became bolder. The stakes grew higher. And finally, to High Dot in Bolivia, a mining company transported a large payroll through rough mountain towns. Butch and Sundance could not resist. They planned the job with precision. The heist was successful, but the escape was not. Witnesses described them clearly. Telegrams spread fast. Bolivian soldiers were alerted instantly. The chase began. Butch, Sundance, and Etta fled to a safe town. But Eddie Hart, heavy, soul, tired, looked at the two men she loved like brothers. I can't watch you die, she said. Sundance held her close. You won't. We'll be careful. No, she whispered. You won't. No outlaw dies old. Butch tried to comfort her. Etta, you're part of us. I was, she said gently. But now, I need to survive. And for the first time since joining them, Etta Plays walked away. She traveled toward the coast, where she would vanish from history. Some say she returned to America. Some say she sailed to Europe. Others believe she stayed in South America under a new name. But one thing was certain. Her leaving broke something inside both men. Alone again. With guns in hand, with Etta gone, Butch and Sundance became shadows of their peaceful selves. The ranch was lost. Their new life had collapsed. Only the outlaw trail remained. Sundance looked at Butch one night and said quietly, We tried. Butch nodded. We did. Yet fate had already written their final chapter. Two men, on the run, half a continent away from home, the world behind them closing, the world ahead of them unforgiving. A storm was waiting in a small Bolivian town, and soon, the last ride of the wild bunch would begin. The Bolivian mountains rose like jagged teeth against the sky, sharp and unforgiving. Dust covered the roads, mule trails twisted like snakes, and every village felt carved out of stone and hardship. It was a world far from Wyoming, far from the wild bunch's old life, and yet fate had brought Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid here for their final chapter. They rode through a lonely valley, the sun burning hot on their backs. Their clothes were worn, their horses tired, their spirits bruised. Etta Place was gone. The ranch dream had died. The peaceful life they had fought for had slipped through their fingers like sand. Now, only two outlaws remained. Two brothers by bond. Not blood. Two legends trying to outrun the last shadow following them. The payroll robbery that changed everything yet began with a single job of payroll from the Aramayo Mining Company. A simple score. Quick, clean. Enough money to buy time and distance. But Bolivia wasn't the wide open West. It had soldiers, telegraphs, and eyes everywhere. The robbery succeeded, but everything after went wrong. A witness recognized them. A telegraph carried their descriptions across the mountains. Bolivian authorities prepared for war. Soldiers armed with carbines and Mausers rode out with orders to hunt down the two American bandits. Butch and Sundance didn't know it yet, but the entire country was looking for them. The town of San Vicente. After days of riding, tired and dusty, the two men reached San Vicente, a tiny mining village sitting alone in the mountains. The houses were small and cracked, the streets narrow, the wind cold. Butch looked around. Quiet place. Sundance nodded. We rest here, one night. They rented a small adobe hut from a local family. The room was dim, the walls made of mud brick, the floor cold ground. They tied their horses behind the house and hoped no one would care enough to look closely. But trouble had already found them. A villager noticed two strangers with good saddles and better guns. He whispered to a mining official. The official sent a message to the local authorities. Within hours, a patrol of Bolivian soldiers rode toward San Vicente. Butch and Sundance sat inside their small hut, eating stale bread and dried meat, unaware that fate was walking straight toward them. The knock on the door began with a shout outside, then the stomp of military boots, then another shout. Sundance froze, bread halfway to his mouth. Butch looked up slowly. Through a small window slit, they saw 6 Bolivian soldiers forming a semicircle around the hut. One of them shouted, "Rindance! Están rodeados! Surrender!" "You are surrounded." Sundance's voice was calm. "They know who we are." Butch cracked a tired smile. "Took them long enough?" Sundance checked his revolver with steady hands. "Butch, we can't outrun this one." Butch nodded once. Not in fear, not in panic, just cold acceptance. "Then we make our stand," he said softly. The gunfight begins. The first shots came from outside. Bolivian soldiers fired into the small windows, bullets tearing into the adobe walls. Dust flew, wood splintered. The room shook. Sundance returned fire with deadly accuracy. Single shots, sharp, fast. 2 soldiers fell instantly. Butch reloaded quickly and fired through the window slit. The recoil jolted his arm. The air filled with smoke and grit. Outside, the soldiers pulled back, shocked by the Americans' precision. Inside the hut, Butch coughed, wiping dirt from his eyes. "We hit him hard." Sundance breathed slowly. "They'll bring more." He was right. Minutes later, reinforcements arrived, more soldiers, more rifles. The second wave opened fire. Bullets ripped through the walls. The room filled with dust and pain. Sundance was hit in the arm. Butch took a graze across his ribs. Still, they fought. Still, they held their ground. Still, the legend stood tall. The final moment as night fell over San Vicente, the gunfire grew louder. The soldiers surrounded the hut completely. No escape. No mercy. Inside, Butch and Sundance leaned against the walls, breathing hard, bleeding, exhausted. Sundance looked at his revolver. "Only a few rounds left. You think we'll make it out?" Butch gave a tired grin. "Maybe tomorrow we buy that ranch." Sundance actually laughed. "Yeah, maybe." Butch leaned back, his voice turning quiet. "You've been a good friend, Sundance." Sundance nodded. "You too, Butch." Outside, the soldiers reloaded for one final assault. Inside, the 2 men prepared for the last fight of their lives. The bullets came like thunder. The walls crumbled. The hut shook, and the world went quiet. What really happened? The next morning, villagers found the bodies of 2 American men in the broken hut. The soldiers claimed they had killed Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. But did they? Some reports said the men took their own lives when they realized escape was impossible. Other stories claimed the Bolivian soldiers shot them both. Some insisted Sundance died first, and Butch ended his friend's suffering before turning the gun on himself. But the truth vanished with the smoke. The mystery that never died years later. Old cowboys in Wyoming claimed they saw Butch Cassidy, alive, older, quieter, living under a different name. Some said he visited his family secretly. Others swore he lived into old age on a small ranch. In Sundance, some believed he made it out to Dot. There was never proof, never certainty. Only whispers. Whispers strong enough to keep legends alive. The legend lives on whether they died in that hut in San Vicente or escaped into another life. One thing is sure, their story did not end there. The names Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid became myths carried across campfires, books, films, and memories. 2 men, 2 outlaws, 2 legends who defied the world and rode into history forever. The dust of Bolivia settled long ago. The adobe walls of San Vicente crumbled back into the earth. The bullets stopped echoing. The soldiers rode away, and with them, the last chapter of the Wild Bunch seemed to fade into history. But legends do not disappear. They travel, they transform, they grow. And the story of Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, and the men who rode with them became something more than crime, more than adventure, more than tragedy. It became a symbol of the end of the Wild West, the end of an era. The early 1900s brought a new world. Telegraphs connected towns in seconds. Railroads stretched across the continent. Courts grew stronger. Lawmen became better. Cities replaced old frontier towns. There was no room left for outlaws on horseback. The Wild Bunch did not just fall. They were overtaken by time itself. They were the last sparks of a fading fire, the final storm of an era that could not survive the modern age. When Butch and Sundance vanished in Bolivia, Their disappearance marked more than the end of two men. It marked the closing of the Wild West itself. Their story became the final line in a long chapter of American frontier history. Newspapers turned them into myths as rumors spread of their deaths. Newspapers in America began writing about them like larger-than-life characters. Some papers painted them as cruel killers. Others described them as polite, charming thieves who avoided violence. Some stories exaggerated their robberies. Others romanticized their escapes. People loved the mystery. Were they heroes? Were they villains? Were they something in between? Public opinion split, but one thing was certain. They had captured the imagination of the world. The Pinkertons couldn't kill the legend Evan. After the Bolivian shootout, the Pinkertons continued searching for proof. They investigated rumors from Wyoming, Montana, Utah, and even New York. They followed stories of an old cowboy with familiar eyes, a quiet ranch hand who looked like Butch, a sharpshooter hiding under another name. But the Pinkertons never found answers. The truth remained out of reach, and every unanswered question made the legend grow stronger. The survivors of the Wild Bunch, the gang that once laughed together around the fire at Hole in the Wall, scattered into history. Elsie served prison time, then rebuilt a quiet life after release, married, worked honest jobs, and lived too old age, one of the few Wild Bunch members who escaped the fate of the gun. Ben Kilpatrick tried to keep the outlaw life going, but was eventually killed during a robbery in Texas. News Carver, wild and unpredictable, died in a shootout with lawmen. Kid Curry met a violent end, surrounded by posses, refusing to surrender. Their roads split, their fates changed. But their stories remained tied to the legacy of the Wild Bunch. Every one of them became a thread in a story, far bigger than their own lives. Butch Cassidy, did he come home? Decades after the Bolivian gunfight, an old man appeared at a ranch in Wyoming. He told stories only Butch Cassidy would know. He spoke of Sundance like a brother. He talked about Etta Place with a soft sadness. He described places in South America no American should know unless he had lived there. Some believed him, some didn't, but the tales spread through the West. Gatherings at ranch houses, old saloons, and campfires kept the whispers alive. Butch came back. Without proof, it became folklore. Without certainty, it became magic. Without answers, it became eternal, whether he lived or died in Bolivia. Butch Cassidy's spirit never left the West. Sundance Kid, the faster gun Sundance's story, held even more mystery. Some said he died in Bolivia. Some said he escaped with Butch, but died later under a different name. Others claimed to have seen him drifting across Argentina long after the gunfight. No one ever proved anything, and that mystery turned him into a timeless figure. The quiet gunman with lightning hands, a man who lived by his own rules until the very end. Etta Place, the woman without a Pastetta Place, became one of the greatest mysteries of frontier history. After leaving Butch and Sundance, she disappeared completely. Some claimed she remarried, others insisted she returned to teaching. Some believed she mourned Sundance until her own quiet death. Her story is a reminder that the Wild West was filled not just with gunfighters and outlaws, but with strong, complex women whose lives shaped the men they loved. Why they're legends still. Lives people still talk about the Wild Bunch for one reason. They were the last outlaws who challenged a changing world. They didn't kill for fun. They didn't hurt the innocent. They didn't seek fame. They sought freedoms, something the modern world was taking away. Their robberies, their escapes, their loyalty, their flaws, their dreams. All of it became part of a story that feels deeply human. A story about men pushed into corners. A story about men trying to survive. A story about men running from time itself. The final ride, the Wild Bunch disappeared long ago. Their guns are rust. Their trails are dust. Their hideouts are ruins. But their legend, alive, growing, unstoppable. Today, their names echo across books, films, museums, and history lessons. Butch Cassidy, Sundance Kid, Kid Curry, Etta Place, Elsie Lay, Will Carver, Ben Kilpatrick, News Carver. They were the end of an era, the last breath of the frontier, the final storm before the modern world took over. And as long as stories are told around campfires, as long as people dream of freedom, as long as the West still calls to the spirit inside us, the Wild Bunch will never truly die.